Bill of Rights Day, and no dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials. And the millennial joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer on the other side of the camera. Welcome, everyone. Today is National Bill of Rights Day. It is December 15th today, otherwise known as National Bill of Rights Day. And we're going to cover a little bit of the Bill of Rights and talk about some interesting things that our federal government has done that needs to be corrected and some of the ways that we can correct them, as well as a couple of other interesting tidbits. The Washington Post has layoffs, and SBF apparently bought a house for his parents in the Bahamas. So first up, ladies and gentlemen, today is the National Bill of Rights Day. December 15th. And it was on this day that James Madison, one of the founding fathers, introduced the Bill of Rights. And that was on June 8th, 1789. James Madison addressed the House of Representatives and introduced a proposed Bill of Rights to the United States Constitution. More than 3 months later, Congress would finally agree on a final list of the rights to present to the states. Some of Madison's opening list of amendments didn't actually make the final cut. The House agreed on a version of the Bill of Rights that had 17 amendments. But later, the Senate consolidated that list to 12 amendments. And then in the end, the states approved 10 of the 12 amendments. Which is interesting, right? Because it shows you the states and the state legislatures are closest to the people. And it was the states that had the ultimate say in which amendments would pass, because they are closest to the people and they are listening to the people the closest because they are next to them and they are elected by them and see them every day, kind of thing, especially at that particular point in history when we had such a small population. One of the two amendments rejected by the states was eventually ratified in 1992 as the 27th Amendment. It restricted the ability of Congress to change the pay of a sitting Congress while in session. Of course, I'm sure some people are like, why pay them at all? And it's kind of interesting because this day, the National Bill of Rights Day, because I was reading Twitter today, my Twitter account, and I noticed, and I didn't really save this, but Adam Schiff, Congressman Adam Schiff, who is, of course, has Trump derangement syndrome and Republican derangement syndrome. Adam Schiff tweeted out this morning that he was horrified that Twitter was going to allow Donald Trump back on Twitter. Now think about that. Today, Adam Schiff tweeted that out, and today is the National Bill of Rights Day. And ladies and gentlemen, what is the very first Bill of Rights? What is the first right in the Bill of Rights, if you will, the very First Amendment? Well, it protects freedom of speech, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom to assemble, to get together with your friends and talk about stuff. No matter what that stuff is, you could be talking about politics. You could be talking about how you don't like your government. You can talk about whatever you want because it's a free country. Freedom of speech and the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. The First Amendment. And yet you have Adam Schiff today on National Bill of Rights Day tweeting out that a former sitting president doesn't have the right to have free speech. But of course, I don't want to make this conversation about just one person, because it's really not just about Donald Trump. It truly is about all of us. Because if you can silence a former president, that is to say, if you can stop and take away a former president's First Amendment rights, well, clearly the rest of us matter even less. And they can stop us from doing the same thing. And this is why the left has gone so crazy about the entire issue of Twitter being taken over by Elon Musk. I mean, they have just completely and utterly freaked out. So the first 10 amendments of the United States Constitution, or the U.S. Bill of Rights, as it is known, was passed. And what's interesting about this is we do have this national day of Bill of Rights, of the Bill of Rights. It's, I guess, not a national holiday, but between you and me, maybe it ought to be. Maybe it ought to be a national holiday where we remind everybody how important James Madison's Bill of Rights actually are today, and they resonate today more than ever. Namely, of course, the right to free speech, and of course, so many other articles as well in this. So many, of course, Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, the right to, protect your family and to bear arms. And then, of course, would you say?
Right against search and seizure.
Right against search and seizure from your government. Kind of interesting, right? Because I'm sure you can probably think about how your government, particularly the FBI and others, certainly seems like they're engaged in a lot of searches and seizures that are way over the line. Certainly searching and seizing items from a former president of the United States who doesn't even have the right to free speech, right? He can't even protect himself, and no one's covering him because of the fact that he has been silenced. So apparently he doesn't have Bill of Rights. And once again, I want you to understand, podcast listeners, I'm not making it just about him, because really it is about all Americans. Your government can do the same thing to you that they are doing to this man. And of course, the idea that you have the freedom of religion, right? Also in the First Amendment. Congress shall make no laws respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting its free exercise. It protects freedom of speech, et cetera, et cetera. So that's also in the First Amendment. And during COVID, we had hysterical state governments across the country doing what? Shutting down churches. Shutting down churches. The one place that you go, of course, to find answers when there aren't any answers to find. Or you may also go to a temple if you're Jewish, or you might go to a mosque if you're Muslim. And that's all fine. But we really need to have this greater conversation about why the Bill of Rights is so important today, and perhaps even more important today than it ever has been, because we've gone through this period of the last 6 years where we have these very wealthy tech owners who have decided to hire only employees that think it's okay to stop you from saying what you want to say. And they use, of course, these terms like, oh, that's hate speech. No, it's speech. Okay? It's speech. Speech, by the way, the hate speech that I'm referring to that they're saying is hate speech. The left says it's hate speech when they disagree with you. It's, oh, that's hate speech. That's racist. It's like, no, actually, it is indeed the case that we have a lot of problems that we should be able to talk about openly. And if you're going to talk about crime in Black neighborhoods across America's blue cities in particular, but there are red cities too, red towns where this is an issue as well. Why does it seem to skew in one direction? And why can't we have that conversation? It's not racist. It's an open conversation. So I wanted to have this conversation about the Bill of Rights, the National Day of Bill of Rights, starting out this podcast today because of the fact that you need to know there are some changes that we need to make, or tightening up of our Constitution, in my opinion, to put more controls, more borders, more, how do I say it, guardrails on our federal government because they're out of control. So here's an example. What'd you say?
Article 5.
Article 5. That's right. That's an Article 5 Convention of States, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Great segue, Christopher. In the Daily Caller, millions of student loan borrowers got emails saying that their student loans were forgiven. Think about this. Your government, your federal government, sent out emails to millions of students or former students who borrowed money, saying to them, guess what? Your student loan is forgiven. You don't owe any money. The Department of Education's Federal Student Aid Program emailed 9 million students to tell them via email that their application for forgiveness has been approved, according to CNN. The email told applicants that their original approval emails were sent in error and that the applications have not been approved or rejected at this point, according to CNN. Why does this matter? It matters, ladies and gentlemen, because you can buy an election this way. And Congress never approved this funding. And so we have a Constitution and we have a Bill of Rights. Today is the National Bill of Rights Day. And we have a federal government through the Department of Education, one of the departments, one of the cabinet departments that allegedly serves the president and the American people, but certainly the president. And they are single-handedly saying, we have the right to spend billions and billions of dollars, and we don't need Congress to do it. Why don't we need Congress to do it? Because we can just do whatever we want. This is what we call the runaway administrative state. The administrative state are the departments in Washington, D.C. that are utterly out of control and think that they can make law. And here's an example right here. The Department of Education deciding it can make law and pay off 9 million student loans. Do you think that wouldn't change the outcome of an election? Hey, make sure you vote for the Democrats because we're going to make sure that we pay off 9 million people's student loans. That's 9 million votes. That would definitely change the outcome of an election. And they sent this email out. And now, of course, they're rescinding the email saying, well, there's a little problem with this. You know, there's an injunction that was put in place by the courts. And so we haven't been able to quite, pay off your loan yet. Sorry, but thanks for the vote. Thanks for the vote. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is an example of why during this day, National Bill of Rights Day, December 15th, 2022, the American people need to vote for and have and hold a convention of states. Because in Article 5 in the Constitution of the United States, a convention of states allows the states to call a convention to amend the Constitution of the United States. And one of the things that needs to be done is to tighten up the language in the Constitution that says that the administrative state, which is utterly out of control, an example here, Department of Education saying that we have the right to pay off 9 million student loans, there needs to be some sort of consequence when these departments are out of control like this. And to be fair, ladies and gentlemen, Congress should be prohibited from giving this authority to the administrative state, because that's what Congress has been doing that. Congress and only Congress should have the right to spend money. And that money, granted, has to be appropriated by Congress. That is to say, has to be, voted on and has to be itemized as to how that money is going to be spent. And then the president signs the bill, and then and only then can the various departments make the decision that they can spend the money exactly the way Congress passed the bill, itemizing and illustrating how that money should be spent. But here we have a situation where 9 million people could have had their loans paid off with no bill passed in the United States Congress. This is, without question, an example of how we are living in post-constitutional times in the United States. We are living in a post-constitutional America when the administrative state thinks it can spend this kind of money, let alone a single dollar, without Congress saying so. And we, the people, have let this happen. We've let this happen. And we, the people, can also stop it from happening with an Article 5 Convention of States. So get this, the Biden administration claims that it actually had the authority to enact the forgiveness of student loans under the so-called HEROES Act of 2003. So there was an act in 2003 called the HEROES Act. So the Biden administration said, well, since that bill was passed by Congress and signed by the president in 2003, and that bill was a response to an emergency situation sparked by the COVID-19, and then that particular act grants the Secretary of Education authority to waive or modify any statutory or regulatory provision applicable to the student financial assistance programs under Article 4 of the Act as the Secretary deems necessary. So allegedly, in 2003, Congress gave the Department of Education and the Secretary of Education the right to basically spend money in any amount under the guise of an emergency. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we just got over an emergency, at least some people have. Some people have gotten over an emergency known as COVID, and we saw how badly that went, where the government was taking away literally the Bill of Rights from us under the guise of emergency. And here, the emergency never seems to end, right? This is the danger. Well, there's an emergency constantly with the federal government. There's another emergency. Well, we get to spend money without Congress. That's a problem. That's a huge problem. One which needs to be fixed with an Article 5 Convention of States. And heads need to roll this time when the Convention of States meets to have some sort of meat in the actual Convention of States adoption of new wording that basically says, look, you can't do this. I mean, a president ought to be removed from power if they think they can do this, because that means the president is no longer president. He is a king. He basically engages in edicts, right?
Yeah. Remember when he claimed that it passed Congress?
Yeah, he claimed that it passed. Yeah, that's right. Biden said, actually, we passed the student loan forgiveness program. It's like, no, actually, you didn't pass it. It's in the many, many, many billions of dollars. I don't know the exact number, but it is basically mind-bending how much money it is. And the thing is, when you live in post-constitutional times and you say to yourself, well, what is the consequence for a president violating the Constitution so incredibly obviously doing so? And honestly, the only true consequence in the Constitution is that the president can be impeached. But the fact of the matter is, we need more than that. Maybe the consequence should be to the secretaries in the departments, that they are immediately removed. I mean, do you really need a check and balance system at that particular point in time? Because these are not even elected officials we're talking about. These are appointed officials in the administrative state. And when an appointed official in the administrative state says, I have the right to spend $100 billion because I can, that individual needs to be removed. And look, I don't know what that language would look like, and it needs to be measured, but it needs to also be really clear that the administrative state cannot do this, and that members of Congress can't delegate all of that spending to the administrative state with a blank check, which is really where we are now, because the The Congress literally does just that. They're like, we're going to pass a bill. We're going to give all that authority to the EPA, and they can just write a check or do whatever they want that make you write a check based on their new rules. Case in point, ladies and gentlemen, here's another example. Biden's EPA prepares to crack down on home appliances. Now, look, there very well may be, okay? There very well may be a reason to get rid of HFCs. And I'm going to read a small portion of this article for you, but it misses the point of what we're making here, namely that it should be Congress that passes such laws. So here's an example. The Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, proposed a new rule and set of rules just last Friday that would restrict the use of refrigerators, air conditioning equipment, and heat pumps that utilize hydrofluorocarbons, or HFCs. The EPA's proposed rule would crack down on manufacturing and importing of goods containing HFCs, which would restrict the use of them in refrigeration units, air conditioning units, heat pump equipment starting in 2025. In other words, in 2 years. According to an agency press release and in accordance to the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol, which has nothing to do with the United States, some international organization, and a global climate treaty that the Senate ratified in September, the Democrat Senate, the agency intends to reduce the production and consumption of HFCs by 85% by 2036. So let's take this apart. Apparently, the United States Senate, under the Democrat control, passed the Montreal Protocol and ratified the Global Climate Treaty. And that Global Climate Treaty was ratified in September so that, among other things, it intends to reduce the production and consumption of HFCs by 85% by 2036. Did the United States Congress pass this law? No. It was a treaty that was negotiated between the President of the United States and the Montreal Protocol climate people, and then it was never even put through the House that I'm aware of. It may have been. It may have been. I don't think it was, though. So let's look this up. It says ratified. Yeah. I don't think the House of Representatives, I think it was just the United States Senate since it was a treaty. And ladies and gentlemen, it was a treaty that was ratified. And then what ended up happening is, and here is the key point, the EPA, part of the administrative state, the Environmental Protection Agency, decided to engage in rulemaking, which is a misnomer because it's really lawmaking, saying that you can't buy such a refrigerator, and no doubt you're going to have a very difficult time replacing any HFCs in existing refrigerators moving forward. Now, if the United States Congress itself, if the elected officials at the federal level in the United States Congress decided in the House and in the Senate to pass such a bill and to provide the specifics in such a bill, and the bill was a single subject bill that dealt just with appliances and HFCs, then I'm pretty sure the American people would have a lot to say about this. They'd have a lot of questions and they'd want to know, but that's not what Congress did. Congress signed some treaty and didn't properly pass the bill that would actually enumerate specifics as to what had to happen moving forward, how it was going to affect the public, how it was going to affect, the average person out there, how it was going to affect the businesses that make these appliances. And so that matters because that's part of the administrative state. That's why we need an Article 5 Convention of States to stop this nonsense from happening in the administrative state and stop the President of the United States signing international treaties that obligate us to do stuff that Congress hasn't even passed. I mean, imagine this. You have a government that told you got to get the vaccine or you can't work or you can't travel. We had some restaurants in New York City, actually quite a few, as well as other businesses saying, don't come in to work if you're not vaccinated. And now we have, and if that weren't personal enough, now we have them saying, well, the refrigerator that you use has to be the one we tell you to buy. And the washer and dryer that you have to use has to be the one that we tell you to buy. And as I said, there might be some facts that could back up the need to curb HFCs for the environment. There very well may be. Let's have that debate. But there isn't a debate about it because Congress never got a chance to talk about it or to pass the bill. So therefore, there was never a debate. And let's face it, if Congress ever did put such a bill in, they would put it in some sort of omnibus bill with 100 other bills, so there wouldn't even be a debate about it anyway. Because how can you debate about 100 things that are completely unrelated? You're not going to. That's why we want a single subject bill requirement in the United States Congress. You got to pass one bill at a time, and it has to cover one subject at a time. And that way we can have an honest debate about each bill, and each bill will have an honest up or down vote. You can't do the old, well, I didn't vote for the bill because of the fact that it was 100 different bills and one of the bills I didn't like. Nonsense. Let's stop that. Let's just have a single subject bill and you can say, yeah, I voted for the bill because I think HFCs are bad, or I voted against the bill because I don't see the issue and I think industry is going to make changes if we give industry incentives to do so. And so today is National Bill of Rights Day, December 15th. And the reason we're talking about this is because increasingly our Bill of Rights are being usurped by the administrative state, by the federal government, and by the big tech monopolies, by the mainstream media. And there is a way to fix this in the Constitution of the United States, and that is an Article 5 Convention of States. And I urge you, ladies and gentlemen, and podcast listeners, to go online to the conventionofstates.com and sign up and become a member. It is free. All you do is give your email address and your basic information, and they will start putting you on their email list, and you'll get information about what the Convention of States actually is, why it is important, why the Constitution has a Convention of States, and how we can take back our government so that it is working for the people rather than the people working for the government. So next up, podcast listeners, the Washington Post lays off a bunch of employees, apparently up to 10% of their employees. Yes, up to 10%. So the WAPO, otherwise known as Washington Post staffers, erupted in complete disagreement and disgust in a town hall meeting at the Washington Post after the publisher of the Post announces layoffs. So the staff at WAPO erupted Wednesday, which was yesterday, after the publisher, Fred Ryan, refused to take questions from staff after announcing layoffs. The Washington Post chief spokesperson, Kathy Baird, confirmed that an unspecified number of positions will be eliminated. You got to love that when you work for a company, to be fair, right? And the head honchos come out and they're like, an unspecified number of persons will be eliminated. And you're like, well, that's really helpful. How am I supposed to plan? You know? And Christmas is only like less than 2 weeks away. So this is your liberal Washington Post for you, right? So, quote, we anticipate it will be a single-digit percentage of our employee base. And, yeah, like 9.99%. And we will finalize those plans over the coming weeks. This will not be a net reduction in Post headcount, though. So let me get this straight. You're cutting employees up to 10% of the Washington Post, but you won't have a net reduction in the Washington Post headcount? Right. The news Washington Post will conduct layoffs in the coming year, says Oliver Darcy. Publisher Fred Ryan told staffers in a town hall, at least sources have told me. Ryan indicated the cuts will be in single digits of the workforce. He also said the total head count will not shrink by the end of next year. Yeah. So why does this matter? Matters because if you actually have a really good quality newspaper with true investigative journalism and honest journalists who report the story, you will make a lot of money, I am convinced. And here is this legacy newspaper, the Washington Post, owned by Jeff Bezos, which has been a complete rag prior to him buying it, quite frankly, and has only gotten worse since he's bought it. And people aren't buying what they have to sell. So they have to lay people off. And so, ladies and gentlemen, this is National Bill of Rights Day, December 15th, and freedom of speech matters. So I want the Washington Post to continue, of course, because it is an iconic newspaper, and it could be a great newspaper if they actually cared about true journalism, which they don't. So unlike my opponents on the left who believe that free speech should be eliminated, that is to say, conservative speech should be eliminated, so they believe, I don't want speech on the left to be eliminated. I want them to be able to say what they want to say. And they usually say it through places like the Washington Post and the New York Times and the mainstream media and the LA Times, the Chicago Tribune, the Philadelphia Inquirer, all left-wing newspapers. But they're all cutting staff. And they don't get the memo. They don't understand what's happening. Like, why aren't people reading what we're writing? Well, because what you're writing isn't a reflection of what's happening. And people aren't stupid. After a while, you can fool them sometimes, but not all the time. So Fred Ryan, the publisher of the Washington Post, had this town hall at the Post headquarters. And at the headquarters, there were a whole bunch of employees, as you can imagine. I think the entire staff of the Post was there. And it looked like a couple hundred people. Difficult to tell, but a lot of people because it was an auditorium. And he gets in front of them and tells them about this layoff that's intended. Remember, it's called a town hall. He called it a town hall, the publisher, Fred Ryan. But he wouldn't allow anyone to ask questions. It was just one of those, here is the way it's going to be. See you later. And he darts out as people are trying to ask him questions. Like, well, wait a minute. I thought this was going to be a town hall. Because the town hall is when you actually have an exchange of ideas and questions. It's like, yeah, welcome to the Washington Post, right? We don't want to hear what you have to say. It's not what we want to hear. And so the other observation, too, watching this, and if you're not watching it, that's why I'm explaining it, is that a whole bunch of their employees in this auditorium are wearing masks. Now, don't you find it funny, ladies and gentlemen? Perhaps maybe a better word is ironic. Don't you find it ironic that people who are supposed to be writing for a newspaper, so-called journalists at the Washington Post, supposedly really working to keep free speech alive at a major newspaper in the United States, are wearing masks, right? Because to me, a mask is a symbol of shut up. That's what a mask means to me. It does. It does. The Speaker of the House of Delegates in the state of Maryland, where I serve, made us this year, during the 90-day legislative session, wear masks. It was mandatory. I saw that as shut up, don't talk. Because that's exactly what it is. It was never about protecting people. It was always about shut up. So there you have journalists, ironically, at the Washington Post, a whole bunch of them wearing masks, which is, without question, in my mind, a symbol of shut up, don't talk. So here is a clip with the Washington Post publisher Fred Ryan, at his town hall, and you can hear him speaking, and then you can hear his employees really upset. We have that clip, and here it is.
Your staff has some questions right now.
We have questions.
And I think because we're journalists, you should answer them because we're a news organization that values transparency. And this is our only opportunity.
No, you have multiple opportunities. As representatives of the Guild, we have representatives from the Post. You meet every week, you're meeting tomorrow. We're not
This is a town hall. This isn't only about the Guild.
Turn the town hall into a grievance session for the Guild. I'm sorry.
It's questions.
Brad, you talked about positions getting eliminated. What are you going to do to protect people's jobs? Are they going to be treated like the magazine staffers were? Are you going to try and
We'll have more
prioritize?
information as we move forward. Thank you very much.
Is this
Positions are decided.
You seem to be disrespecting this room. You are disrespecting this room.
I can't believe this is embarrassing. This is embarrassing. He just walked out.
Don't you guys find this funny? What's funny is not that people are going to lose their jobs. Okay, I want to make that crystal clear. What is funny, however, is that you have these employees at the Washington Post who are upset that they're being silenced during a town hall. You know, silence, you can't ask any questions. That's not the purpose of a town hall, says the publisher of the Washington Post. I'm like, well, what? Why can't we ask questions? It's like, well, wait a minute, Washington Post journalists. Welcome to the First Amendment. Welcome to the First Amendment, because that's exactly what we've been saying about you. We've been saying about you, you won't let us ask questions. And now you're not allowed to ask them to your own publisher. How does that feel?
Why don't they act like that when the president walks away?
That's right, exactly. That was the other. It's so funny, Chris. That was my observation too, which is when they're in the White House press room with Jean-Pierre, and the president's there too, and the president starts talking, and they ask him questions, and he refuses to answer a question. Why don't they do the same thing to him, which is, Mr. President, I don't understand why you think it's constitutional to allow the federal government to pay off 6 million student loans without Congress actually passing a bill saying you can do it. Wait a minute, Mr. President, don't walk out. This question matters. It's unconstitutional. Do you not care about the Constitution? Washington Post journalists would never do that. Ever. Instead, they've spent the past 3 years telling you, average American, to shut up. Don't talk about COVID. Don't talk about anything that has to do with lockdowns. Shut up. Don't go to church because they're locked down too. Don't go to work. Shut your business down. We're going to censor you. We're not going to ask any critical questions about whether any of the COVID policies were a violation of your constitutional rights, let alone the Bill of Rights, which obviously is part of the Constitution. And so that's what I find ironic about this, is the Washington Post publisher who basically announces almost 10% of the people are going to lose their jobs, and he does so within 2 weeks of Christmas. At the same time, in a town hall that he established as a town hall in person, tells his journalists, I'm not here to hear grievances. I'm not here to answer questions either. This is a place of journalism. I can't answer questions. So look, I don't want to see newspapers go out of business. Too many have already gone out of business. What I want to see them do instead is actually be real newspapers. That's all I'm asking. That's all anyone should be asking. And I bet you that room of journalists went home and not one of them saw the irony of what had just happened between how they have comported themselves as journalists for years and what this guy, the publisher, did to them. So it's okay for them to tell us to shut up, don't talk, you should be censored. But no, it's not okay for the publisher to do it to them because they're special. As they wear their masks. I'm sorry. It's just so ironic. So here's the thing. Here's something that's interesting that I learned recently, and I should have known it already, but I didn't, to be frank with you. And that is, there are a lot of independent journalists across America, and this part I did know, and some work for Substack, or some have a Substack, excuse me, and they work for themselves. Others are just great journalists, and they have their own websites and their own papers that they have created. And to the extent that you like some of these investigative journalists, and you're going to find some of them are going to be left of center, but actually are honest. And some are going to be right of center and are actually honest and are going to do critical thinking reporting. Well, there's a widget that allows you to actually tip many of these journalists online. Tip them. Not give them a tip, like, oh, I have a tip for you. It's a really good scoop. Not a scoop, but actual money. You can actually give them money. And by the way, it doesn't have to, I'm not talking about $100. I'm talking about $1, right? But imagine if in the United States of America, in order to be able to save true investigative journalism and to be able to firm up the First Amendment in the United States of America, that we, the people, maybe let's say 80 million of us, each of us gave $1 a month to that single journalist that we really, really liked. And we tipped them online because that widget does exist in many different platforms. And if you did that and that money went directly to the journalist, not to the company, you were rewarding and showing respect to the journalist for the hard work that they did, because these folks make like no money. It's just so you know. They make very little money, which is why so few people want to become journalists, which is why we have so many bad journalists. I mean, there was a time when there was true investigative journalism in the United States, and it was very thorough, and you knew who those people were, and that's where you went when you really wanted to know what was going on. And you would listen to different, sides, of course, as we would like to do now. That's gone. So what we're left with now are individuals who write because they like to do so, or we're left with places like the Washington Post or the New York Times or the mainstream media who have no interest in writing anything in depth about anything. It's all superficial. So when you do find that journalist, whoever that may be, that writes articles not that you politically necessarily agree with, but that you respect because you can tell they did a lot of research and gave you a lot of depth and historical knowledge about an issue of the day, and then let you make your own decision about that issue because they gave you so much background information, tip them $1. And if 80 million people did that a month, think about that. That only cost you $12 a month, $12 a year, $12 a year. And if 80 million people did that, I mean, my God, that's real money. And that will save journalism in the United States, because journalism, in my opinion, is completely and utterly gone and broken from these large conglomerate companies and or big tech companies, whether it be the Washington Post, New York Times, as I've already mentioned, or whether it be, some of these platforms like Facebook, where you can post, you can put a story on your website and you can post it on Facebook, or you can blog and then put it on Facebook, or any other place where Google, of course, forget it. They just take all of your money, period. They're the ones who have gutted journalism, as are, a lot of bad journalists. But this is an interesting aside. And I really wanted to bring this up to you folks out there in podcast land, because I believe that tipping journalists, that is the way forward to saving the First Amendment in the United States and saving true investigative journalism, which will also save our country. Because when you don't know about something, and you all know this out there very well, when you don't know about a story, you probably will vote when you go to the polls and vote. Had you known about a story, it may have changed your vote. Well, the left knows this, which is why they're not reporting stuff. They're very good at this. They're very good at censorship. I mean, this is how the left remains in power. They remain in power by not telling you stuff, by keeping you ignorant and uninformed. That's the only way they can stay in power, because we know that their ideas are bankrupt and have been throughout history. And so we can actually take back journalism, we the people, by tipping journalists and at the same time rewarding those journalists so that we actually have the truth getting out there. And to be very clear, when you are a journalist and you are writing a story, it's very hard for people to see that story because you know that you're being algorithmed out, which is really the point that I was making before. So we also need to find a way for people to actually know where to find you, because we know that Google will do everything it can to stop people from seeing what you're writing, especially if it involves critical thinking. God forbid. So let's say this about the Washington Post and the layoffs. Just to close out this segment, I don't want to see people lose their jobs. Certainly not before Christmas. It's the worst possible time. But if you actually were a real paper, Washington Post, you'd be gaining jobs, because that's what Substack is doing, right? You got all these Substacks and people creating their own Substacks, and they're writing and they're being tipped accordingly. And that seems to be the future. That really seems to be the future, if not the present, of true journalism. I just hope it grows and grows and grows. And I hope more of the American people find out about this. So next up, podcast listeners, SBF bought his parents a home in the Bahamas. Yeah. So get this. So Sam Bankman-Fried was arrested, as you all know, and he apparently, this is my understanding at least, he apparently, after being arrested, asked for vegan food only while being in prison. This is according to the New York Post. So Sam Bankman-Fried's family reportedly called prison to request vegan meals. So, excuse me, Mr. Bahamian, is there a room service here? I don't understand. I don't understand. My mommy and daddy have always protected me. I mean, I'm 30 and I've, ripped off $40 billion, but I want to make sure that I've got, like room service in my prison cell. And I want vegan food only. So the founder of the collapsed cryptocurrency exchange, FTX, who was charged this week with multiple financial crimes, has his own room in the maximum security prison section of the Bahamas lockup that is known to be crawling with rats and maggots, according to unnamed sources, which told Bloomberg News, that is. Bankman-Fried's relatives called the Fox Hill jail in Nassau Tuesday night to request that vegan meals be provided to him, a source told the outlet. The 30-year-old Bankman-Fried, known in crypto circles by his initials SBF, silent but deadly, was ordered earlier Tuesday to remain at the notorious jail through February 8th for his extradition hearing. He was arrested this week on multiple charges stemming from allegations that he deceived FTX customers and investors to enrich himself and others. And here's what's really kind of ironic about Libs. Get this. He can't receive visitors in prison due to COVID-19 restrictions in the Bahamas. So here's the left, like eating their own. We still have COVID-19 restrictions, and you can't receive any visitors in jail because of COVID-19. Well, wait a minute. Isn't that by definition locked down? I mean, we were locked down in our houses during peak COVID. Isn't he being locked down? Why can't he have visitors? I don't understand. Gosh. Apparently, and they have pictures here in the New York Post of the facility where he is being held. So then they have pictures of his parents, Joseph Bankman So SBF's parents, Joseph Bankman and Barbara Fried, both Stanford University professors. Let me say that again. Both Stanford University professors. SBF's parents, Joseph Bankman and Barbara Fried. And when you look at these two people, they look like your classic professor, crazy, whack job liberals. You just look at them, it's just like, they just look totally out of it. And you can tell they're really wacky. Why do I feel comfortable saying this about them? Because they're the ones who have enabled their son to rip off all this money. And we all know it. So in the New York Post, and I'm going to read this because this is really important. Who are Sam Bankman-Fried's parents? Meet the law professors. They're law professors at Stanford. Joseph and Barbara. Like any good parent, Sam Bankman-Fried's mother and father have stood firmly behind their son from the beginning of his crypto career until his fall from grace, but their staunch support and recent courtroom antics have put them under heavy scrutiny, as they should be. Joseph Bankman and Barbara Fried, both professors at Stanford University Law School, sat in the third row of Bankman-Fried's extradition hearing in the Bahamas, where their animated expressions were in full view. Bankman, who received payments from FTX, was heavily involved in the doomed platform's operations, was seen sporadically plugging his ears through the process. What? Why was he plugging his ears? While Fried laughed several times. So he thinks this is funny. I mean, so he must know something we don't know in terms of him being able to get off or something. Wouldn't surprise me. Bankman, who received payments from FTX, was heavily involved in the Doom platform's operations. New FTX CEO John Ray revealed he will be investigating Bankman and Fried's role in their son's alleged cryptocurrency scam. So, the trustee running the bankrupt FTX, appointed by the court, is going to look at the parents and find out what they knew and when they knew it. Why does that matter, ladies and gentlemen? Well, it matters because SBF bought them a house in the Bahamas with the FTX money. In other words, with your money. According to his faculty biography, Mr. Bankman, that's SBF's dad, specializes in tax law. Ha! You gotta love that. And has written 2 case books on the subject. Well, apparently his son didn't know anything. Oh, yeah, sure. Dad didn't know anything either. That's why he's in the Bahamas, right? Tax law. Fried is a professor emeritus at the law school of Stanford. Like her husband, she has wrote about tax policy, but her scholarly interests lie at the intersection of law, economics, and philosophy. Her biography states the philosophy of ripping people off. Oh, my God. So he actually bought them a house. He bought them a house, and it says it somewhere in this article. Here we go. So I'll end with this, ladies and gentlemen. Additionally, Bankman-Fried, SBF, bought a $16.4 million house in the Bahamas for his parents in the name of FTX. So he spent $16.4 million for a house in the Bahamas using FTX's money, and it's titled in the name of FTX. And mom and dad live there. And as far as they're concerned, they didn't know anything. Sure. Okay. Exactly. Stanford professors. I'm sorry. Those two, I have no doubt, and I hope they are charged because they knew all along what was happening, without question. No doubt in my mind. And that's the last word from Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Twitter 2.0, Facebook, Getter, Truth Social, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.